The rain fell heavy on the cobblestones of the old marketplace. Elena Martinez stood with her hands bound behind her back, surrounded by a crowd of angry villagers. Their faces showed no mercy, only hatred and fear. She had been caught trying to steal medicine from the local pharmacy, but that was not the real reason they wanted to punish her. Elena was different. She had always been different. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, being different was dangerous. The townspeople whispered about her strange habits, her late-night walks, and the way she seemed to know things before they happened. Some called her a witch. Others said she was cursed. But Elena knew the truth was much more complicated than their simple minds could understand. The town's military commander, Captain Marcus Stone, had arrived just minutes ago with his soldiers. He was a tall man with dark hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to see everything. The villagers had demanded justice, and the captain had agreed to oversee the punishment. In this remote corner of the country, military law was the only law that mattered. Elena kept her head high despite the fear growing in her chest. She had survived worse things than this. Growing up as an orphan on the streets had taught her to be strong, to never show weakness even when facing death. But as she looked at the angry faces around her, she wondered if this time might be different. The captain stepped forward, his black boots clicking on the wet stones. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had seen many battles and won them all. His uniform was perfectly pressed despite the rain, and his sword hung at his side like a promise of violence. The crowd fell silent as he approached. "Elena Martinez," he said in a voice that carried across the square, "you have been accused of theft, but the people here believe your crimes go much deeper than that. They say you practice dark magic, that you bring bad luck to their crops and their children." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "I took medicine for a sick child. If that makes me a criminal in your eyes, then I accept whatever punishment you think I deserve." The captain studied her face for a long moment. There was something about her that made him pause, though he could not say what it was. She was beautiful, certainly, with long dark hair and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. But there was more than that. There was a strength in her that reminded him of someone, though he could not remember who. "The law is clear," he said finally. "Theft is punishable by public humiliation and imprisonment. But these people want more than that. They want to see if you really are what they think you are." Elena's heart began to beat faster. She knew what was coming next. In times like these, when fear ruled over reason, people did terrible things to those they did not understand. The old ways of testing for witchcraft were still practiced in remote places like this, even though the modern world had moved beyond such superstitions. An old woman pushed through the crowd, her gray hair wild and her eyes filled with hatred. "Strip her bare," she shouted. "Let us see if she bears the devil's mark. Let us see the truth of what she is." The crowd began to chant, their voices rising like a storm. "Strip her! Strip her! Show us the truth!" The rain continued to fall, mixing with the mud at their feet and making the stones slippery and dangerous. Captain Stone raised his hand for silence. The crowd obeyed, but their anger was still there, waiting just beneath the surface. He looked at Elena again, and for a moment she thought she saw something like doubt in his eyes. But then his face hardened, and she knew he would not save her from what was to come. "Very well," he said. "If this is what the people demand, then this is what they shall have. But it will be done according to military procedure, not as a mob action." He turned to his soldiers, 6 men in matching uniforms who had been watching silently from the edge of the square. "Form a perimeter. No one approaches without my permission." The soldiers moved quickly, creating a circle around Elena and the captain that kept the crowd at a safe distance. Elena closed her eyes and tried to prepare herself for what was about to happen. She had always known this day might come. The secret she carried was too dangerous, too important to remain hidden forever, but she had hoped to have more time, to find a way to complete her mission before anyone discovered the truth. The captain stepped closer to her, close enough that only she could hear his words. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "but I have no choice. The people must be satisfied or they will riot. Better this than a bloodbath." Elena opened her eyes and looked at him. "Do what you must, Captain. But know that you may regret this decision for the rest of your life." Something in her voice made him pause. There was no fear there, no pleading or desperation. Instead, there was a strange kind of sadness, as if she pitied him rather than herself. It was not the reaction he had expected from someone about to be publicly humiliated. The captain nodded to his men, and they stepped forward. Elena did not resist as they began to remove her clothes. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for the spectacle they had demanded. The rain continued to fall, washing away the dirt and sweat from her skin as each piece of clothing was taken away. But as the final garment was removed, something extraordinary happened. The captain's eyes fell upon Elena's back and he froze. There, running along the length of her spine, was a tattoo unlike anything he had ever seen. It was not the crude marking of a criminal or the simple design of a village girl. This was something else entirely. The tattoo was intricate and beautiful, made up of symbols and letters that seemed to shift and change in the flickering light of the torches. Some of the symbols he recognized from his military training, ancient codes used by intelligence agencies. Others were completely foreign to him, but there was something about them that made his blood run cold. At the base of the tattoo, just above the small of her back, was a number sequence that made the captain's breath catch in his throat. He knew those numbers. Every soldier in the special forces knew those numbers. They marked Elena not as a witch or a criminal, but as something far more dangerous and far more important than anyone in this crowd could possibly imagine. The captain's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. The mission briefings he had received months ago suddenly made terrible sense. The warnings about a missing operative, the orders to watch for certain signs, the photographs he had been shown but told to forget. Elena Martinez was not just a thief caught stealing medicine. She was a ghost, a legend, someone who was supposed to be dead. Captain Stone's hands trembled as he stared at the tattoo on Elena's spine. The crowd behind him grew restless, demanding to know what he had found, but he could not speak. His mind was flooded with memories from 3 years ago, when he had been a young lieutenant working intelligence operations in the capital city, Agent Phoenix. That had been her code name, the most successful spy in the country's history, responsible for taking down an entire network of enemy agents and saving thousands of lives. She had disappeared during her final mission, and everyone assumed she was dead. Her file had been classified at the highest levels, and her real identity was known only to a handful of people. Elena Martinez was Agent Phoenix. The captain forced himself to remain calm as the crowd pressed closer. They could see something had changed, that he had discovered something important, but they did not know what. The old woman who had first called for Elena to be stripped pushed forward, trying to see over his shoulder. "What is it?" she demanded. "What mark does she bear? Is she a witch? Is she cursed?" Captain Stone turned slowly to face the crowd. His mind was working quickly now, calculating options and consequences. If these people learned the truth about Elena, word would spread quickly through the surrounding villages. Within days, every enemy agent in the region would know that Agent Phoenix was alive and hiding in their territory. The results would be catastrophic, not just for Elena but for national security. "There is no devil's mark," he announced in a voice that carried across the square. "This woman bears only the scars of a hard life. Your suspicions are unfounded." The crowd erupted in anger and disappointment. They had come expecting to witness the exposure of a witch, and now they were being told their fears were groundless. Several people shouted accusations that the captain was lying, that he was protecting Elena for his own dark purposes. "You lie," screamed the old woman. "We know what she is. We have seen her strange powers. She must be punished." Captain Stone drew his sword in one smooth motion, the steel ringing as it cleared the scabbard. The sound cut through the noise of the crowd like a blade through silk, and suddenly everyone was silent. The captain's eyes were hard as stone as he looked at each face in turn. "I am the military authority in this region," he said in a voice that promised violence to anyone who challenged him. "My word is law. This woman is guilty only of theft, and she will be punished according to military justice. Anyone who disagrees is welcome to face me in combat." No one moved. No one spoke. The captain was known throughout the region as a skilled fighter, and his reputation was enough to keep even the angriest villagers in line. After a long moment, the crowd began to disperse, muttering among themselves but unwilling to challenge his authority directly. Elena watched all of this with growing confusion. She could not understand why the captain had lied about what he had seen. Her tattoo was clearly visible, and any trained military officer would recognize at least some of the symbols. But instead of exposing her, he had protected her. The question was why. The captain waited until the last of the villagers had gone before turning back to Elena. His soldiers were still maintaining their perimeter, but they were far enough away that he could speak without being overheard. He sheathed his sword and looked into Elena's eyes, searching for confirmation of what he already knew. "Agent Phoenix," he said quietly, "I thought you were dead." Elena's face showed no emotion, but her mind was racing. The captain clearly knew who she was, but she could not be sure if he was friend or enemy. In her line of work, trust was a luxury she could not afford. Even fellow agents could be turned, could be working for the other side. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said carefully. "My name is Elena Martinez. I am just a village girl who made a mistake." Captain Stone smiled grimly. "Lieutenant Marcus Stone, Special Intelligence Division. I was briefed on your operations when I was stationed in the capital. Your handler, Colonel Rodriguez, showed me your file. You were considered the best agent we had." At the mention of Colonel Rodriguez, Elena's careful mask slipped for just a moment. Rodriguez had been like a father to her, the only person in the intelligence service who had truly cared about her as more than just a useful tool. If this captain really knew Rodriguez, then he might be telling the truth about his identity. "Rodriguez died 6 months ago," she said, testing him. "Heart attack in his office." The captain shook his head. "Not a heart attack. He was poisoned. We found traces of a rare toxin in his coffee. Someone wanted to make sure he could not pass on whatever information he had about your final mission." Elena's eyes widened in shock. She had heard about Rodriguez's death through unofficial channels, but she had been told it was natural causes. If he had been murdered, it meant that someone had discovered her connection to him. It meant that her cover might have been blown from the very beginning. "Who ordered the investigation into his death?" she asked. "I did," Captain Stone replied. "Rodriguez was my mentor when I first joined intelligence. He taught me everything I know about the business. When he died, I made sure his death was properly investigated, even though my superiors wanted to close the case quickly." Elena studied the captain's face carefully. There was pain there when he spoke of Rodriguez, the kind of genuine emotion that was difficult to fake. But she had learned never to trust anyone completely, no matter how convincing they seemed. "What did you find?" she asked. "Enough to know that there is a traitor somewhere high up in the intelligence service, someone with access to classified files and operational details. Rodriguez was getting close to identifying this person when he was killed." The captain paused, looking around to make sure they were not being watched. "I believe your final mission was compromised from the beginning. I think you were sent into a trap." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain still falling around them. Her final mission had been to infiltrate a terrorist cell that was planning to attack government buildings in the capital. She had spent months building her cover identity and gaining the trust of the cell's members. But on the night of the planned attack, everything had gone wrong. The terrorists had been waiting for her. They knew she was a government agent, and they had prepared an ambush. Elena had barely escaped with her life, and in the process, she had been forced to kill 3 men who had once trusted her. The experience had left her questioning everything she had believed about her work and her country. "Why should I trust you?" she asked the captain. "Because I am the only person standing between you and a very unpleasant death," he replied. "The enemies you made during your career have not forgotten about you. There is a price on your head, and there are people in this region who would be very happy to collect it." Elena looked around the empty square. The rain was beginning to lighten, but the clouds overhead promised more storms to come. She was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of living in fear, but she was not ready to die, especially not for a cause she was no longer sure she believed in. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Captain Stone was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to know what really happened on your final mission. I want to know what you discovered that was so dangerous someone was willing to kill Rodriguez to keep it secret. And I want to help you finish what you started." Elena stared at Captain Stone for what felt like an eternity. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the edges of the buildings around them, creating a steady rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. His soldiers remained at their posts, but she could see them growing restless. They would not be able to maintain this charade much longer. "Give me your jacket," she said finally. Without hesitation, the captain removed his military jacket and handed it to her. Elena pulled it on, grateful for the warmth and coverage it provided. The jacket was too large for her, but it would serve its purpose until she could find proper clothing. "We cannot talk here," she said, glancing around the square. "Too many eyes, too many ears. Is there somewhere private we can go?" Captain Stone nodded. "My command post is in the old garrison building on the edge of town. It is secure, and my men know not to disturb me when I am conducting interrogations." Elena almost smiled at that. "Is that what this is? An interrogation?" "As far as anyone else needs to know, yes." The captain turned to his soldiers and raised his voice. "Take the prisoner to the garrison for questioning. Full security protocols. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." The soldiers moved quickly to surround Elena, creating the appearance of a formal arrest. She allowed herself to be escorted through the narrow streets of the village, noting the faces that watched from windows and doorways. Word of what had happened in the square would spread quickly, but hopefully the story would be that she had been found innocent of witchcraft and was being held only for theft. The garrison building was a relic from an earlier time, when this region had been a frontier territory requiring constant military presence. Most of it was now empty, used only for storage and the occasional patrol base. Captain Stone's command post occupied what had once been the commander's quarters, a suite of rooms on the second floor with thick stone walls and narrow windows. Once they were alone, the captain poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that had been warming on a small stove. Elena accepted hers gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic and breathing in the rich aroma. It had been weeks since she had tasted real coffee. "Start from the beginning," Captain Stone said, settling into a chair across from her. "Tell me about your final mission." Elena took a sip of coffee and considered how much to reveal. The captain seemed sincere, and his knowledge of Colonel Rodriguez suggested he was telling the truth about his background, but years of covert work had taught her to be cautious, to reveal information slowly and watch for reactions. "The mission briefing came directly from the Director of Intelligence," she began. "We had received information about a terrorist cell operating out of an abandoned warehouse complex in the industrial district. The cell was reportedly planning coordinated attacks on government buildings, including the presidential palace." "What kind of information? From what source?" "That was classified above my level. All I was told was that the source was reliable and that the threat was immediate. I was given 2 weeks to infiltrate the cell and gather intelligence on their plans, then coordinate with tactical teams to neutralize the threat." Captain Stone frowned. 2 weeks seems like a very short timeline for that kind of operation. Usually infiltration missions take months of preparation. Elena nodded. "I thought the same thing, but my handlers insisted that time was critical. They said the attacks were planned for the anniversary of the revolution, which was only 3 weeks away. I was told to use whatever methods necessary to gain the cell's trust quickly. How did you make contact?" Elena's expression darkened as she remembered those early days of the mission. There was a bar in the warehouse district, a place where unemployed workers and petty criminals gathered. Intelligence had identified it as a recruiting ground for the terrorist cell. I spent several nights there, building a reputation as someone who was angry at the government and looking for a way to strike back. "What was your cover story?" I was Maria Santos, a former government clerk who had been fired for stealing files. I claimed to have inside knowledge of security procedures at government buildings, and I let it be known that I was willing to sell that information to anyone who could pay. Captain Stone leaned forward, his eyes intense. "That is a very dangerous cover identity. If anyone had checked your background thoroughly—" "They did check," Elena interrupted. "That was the strangest part. Within 2 days of making contact, they seemed to know everything about Maria Santos. They knew details about her employment, history, her family background, even personal information that should not have been in any official records. It was as if someone had prepared an incredibly detailed false identity for me. Someone did. The question is who?" Elena took another sip of coffee, using the time to organize her thoughts. The cell leader was a man named Viktor Kozlov, a former military officer who had been dishonorably discharged for selling weapons to black market dealers. He was smart, paranoid, and completely ruthless. But he believed my cover story completely. "What did you learn about their plans?" "More than I expected. They were not just planning to attack government buildings. They had detailed intelligence on security procedures, shift schedules, even the personal habits of key officials. They knew things that only someone with high-level access could have known. Captain Stone set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. You think there was a government source feeding them information? I was certain of it, but when I tried to report this to my handlers, they seemed uninterested. They kept pushing me to focus on the operational details of the attacks, not on how the terrorists had acquired their intelligence. Elena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the village below. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from chimneys as families prepared their evening meals. It was a peaceful scene, very different from the violent world she had inhabited for so many years. The night of the planned attack, she continued, everything went wrong. I was supposed to signal the tactical teams when the terrorists left their base, but when I activated my emergency beacon, nothing happened. No response, no backup, nothing. What did you do? I tried to abort the mission, to get out before the attacks began, but Kozlov was suspicious. He had received word that government forces were mobilizing, and he suspected there was a spy in his group. Elena turned back to face the captain. He was right, of course, but not in the way he thought. What do you mean? Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There was another spy in the group, someone who had been there much longer than me. But this person was not working for our government. They were working for someone else entirely. Captain Stone felt a chill run down his spine. Who? I never found out for certain, but I overheard a conversation between this person and Kozlov. They were discussing plans to make sure the attack succeeded, and that any government agents who tried to interfere would be eliminated. They knew about me, Captain. They knew exactly who I was and why I was there. How did you escape? Elena's eyes grew distant as she remembered that terrible night. The attacks began earlier than planned. Instead of coordinating strikes on multiple targets, they focused everything on the presidential palace. But it was not really an attack. It was an assassination attempt disguised as a terrorist bombing. The president was not harmed. No, because I managed to get word to the palace security team just minutes before the attack began. But in doing so, I exposed myself to Kozlov and his people. There was a firefight in the warehouse. 3 men died, including Kozlov. Captain Stone studied Elena's face carefully. She was telling the truth, he was certain of that. But there were still pieces of the puzzle missing, details that did not quite fit together. If you stopped the assassination attempt, why did you not return to headquarters? Why have you been hiding for 3 years? Elena met his gaze directly. Because when I tried to contact my handlers after the mission, I discovered that my access codes had been revoked. My bank accounts were frozen. My apartment had been searched by people claiming to be federal agents. As far as the intelligence service was concerned, Agent Phoenix no longer existed. Someone wanted you to disappear. Someone wanted me dead. But they were smart enough to make it look like I had simply vanished during the mission. No body to explain, no messy investigation, no awkward questions about how a highly trained agent could simply disappear. Captain Stone stood and began pacing the room. The implications of what Elena was telling him were staggering. If there really was a high-level conspiracy within the intelligence service, it would explain many things that had puzzled him over the past few years. The unusual mission assignments, the classified files that seemed to disappear, the way certain investigations were quietly shut down before they could be completed. Colonel Rodriguez suspected something, he said finally. In the months before his death, he was asking questions about missing agents, about missions that had gone wrong. He never mentioned you specifically, but now I think he was trying to piece together the same conspiracy you had discovered. Elena nodded grimly. Rodriguez was a good man, an honest man. In our business, that made him dangerous to the wrong people. Do you have any proof of what you are telling me? Any evidence that could be used to expose this conspiracy? Elena reached into an inner pocket of the captain's jacket and pulled out a small metal object. It looked like an ordinary thumb drive, the kind used to store computer files. But Captain Stone could see that it had been modified with additional circuitry. Everything is on here, Elena said. Financial records, communication intercepts, operational reports that were never filed officially. 3 years of investigation into who betrayed me and why. The problem is that I cannot access any of it without the right equipment and a secure network connection. Captain Stone took the drive and examined it carefully. The modifications were sophisticated, clearly the work of someone with advanced technical skills. What kind of encryption are we dealing with? Military grade with multiple authentication layers. It can only be opened at a secure government facility with the proper clearance codes. Elena smiled grimly. The irony is that I need help from the very organization that wants me dead. Captain Stone turned the encrypted drive over in his hands, feeling the weight of its secrets. Outside, night was falling over the village, and he could hear his soldiers settling into their evening routines. The normalcy of these sounds contrasted sharply with the extraordinary revelation he was facing. "There is a secure communications terminal in the basement of this building," he said finally. "It connects directly to military intelligence headquarters. If your evidence is as damning as you claim, we could transmit it tonight." Elena shook her head. Too risky. If there really is a high-level conspiracy, they will be monitoring all official channels. The moment we attempt to access that data, they will know exactly where we are and what we are doing. Then what do you suggest? Elena walked to the window and peered out at the darkening streets. We need to find someone we can trust completely. Someone who is outside the normal intelligence structure, but who has the authority to act on what we discover. That is a very short list. There is one person, Elena said slowly. General Patricia Vasquez, the defense minister. She has a reputation for integrity, and she has been pushing for reforms in the intelligence services. More importantly, she was Colonel Rodriguez's commanding officer before he transferred to intelligence work. Captain Stone considered this. General Vasquez was indeed known for her uncompromising ethics and her willingness to take on powerful enemies when she believed it was necessary. But she was also a political figure, which meant approaching her would carry its own risks. How do you propose we contact her without alerting the wrong people? Vasquez has a private estate about 50 kilometers from here. She goes there every weekend to ride horses and get away from the politics of the capital. If we could reach her there, we might be able to present our evidence without going through official channels. Captain Stone frowned. Breaking into a general's private property is not exactly a low-risk proposition. Her security detail would shoot first and ask questions later. Not breaking in, Elena corrected. I have met General Vasquez before, during a commendation ceremony after one of my successful missions. She might remember me, and she certainly would remember Colonel Rodriguez's recommendation. If we can get close enough to identify ourselves, that is still assuming we can travel 50 kilometers without being detected. By now, word of what happened in the square will have spread to neighboring villages. If there are enemy agents in the area, they will be looking for any unusual activity. Elena smiled for the first time since the captain had recognized her tattoo. Let me worry about traveling undetected. That is what I do best. Captain Stone studied her face in the lamplight. Despite everything she had been through, despite 3 years of living in hiding, Elena still carried herself with the confidence of a professional operative. He found himself wondering what it had cost her to maintain that facade, what price she had paid for her dedication to duty. There is something else we need to discuss, he said. Even if we succeed in getting this information to General Vasquez, even if she believes us and takes action, you will still be in danger. The people behind this conspiracy will not simply give up and disappear. They will come after you with everything they have. Elena's expression grew serious. I have been in danger for 3 years, Captain. At least now I have a chance to fight back instead of just running and hiding. What about after? Assuming we survive this, what kind of life can you hope to have? Agent Phoenix is officially dead, and Elena Martinez is just a village girl with no real past. Either way, you are trapped between identities that cannot sustain you. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the night sky. I stopped thinking about the future a long time ago. In my line of work, planning beyond the next mission is a luxury most of us cannot afford. But you must have hoped for something more. Before all of this happened, before your final mission went wrong, what did you want your life to be? Elena turned away from the window and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. You ask dangerous questions, Captain. The moment an agent starts thinking about a normal life, about a future beyond the next assignment, that is when they become vulnerable. That is when they start making mistakes. Is that what happened to you? Did you start wanting something more? Elena's laugh was bitter. No, Captain. What happened to me is that I discovered the people I had been risking my life for were not worth the sacrifice. I learned that honor and duty and patriotism are just words that powerful. People use to manipulate those who still believe in something greater than themselves. Captain Stone felt a stirring of anger at her words, but he forced himself to remain calm. Not everyone in government service is corrupt. Not everyone is part of whatever conspiracy you uncovered. How can you be so certain? How do you know that you are not being manipulated just as I was? How do you know that this conversation, this moment, is not part of some larger plan that you cannot see? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Captain Stone had to admit that Elena had a point. In the intelligence business, paranoia was not just the occupational hazard. It was a survival skill. Trust was a weakness that could get you killed. I suppose I cannot be certain, he admitted. But I have to believe that there are still people worth fighting for, still causes worth risking everything to defend. Otherwise, what is the point of any of this? Elena studied his face carefully. You remind me of myself 5 years ago. So certain, so idealistic, so convinced that the good guys always win in the end. What changed your mind? Experience, she said simply. Too many missions where the objectives were not what they seemed. Too many times when the people we were supposed to protect turned out to be just as corrupt as the enemies we were fighting. Too many good agents who died for causes that were not worthy of their sacrifice. Captain Stone walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to Elena. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we are all just pawns in someone else's game. But even pawns can sometimes change the outcome of the match if they move at the right moment. Elena accepted the whiskey and took a small sip. The alcohol burned her throat, but it also warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. What are you proposing, Captain? I am proposing that we make our move tonight before anyone else has time to react. We take your evidence to General Vasquez and we let the consequences fall where they may. And if we are wrong about her, if she is part of the conspiracy, or if she simply does not believe us. Captain Stone raised his glass in a mock toast. Then we will probably be dead by morning. But at least we will die knowing that we tried to do the right thing. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then raised her own glass. To Colonel Rodriguez, she said quietly. He deserved better than what he got. To Rodriguez, Captain Stone agreed, and to the chance that his death might still mean something. They drank in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the village had settled into the quiet rhythm of night. Soon it would be time to move, to take the first step toward either justice or destruction. Elena set down her glass and walked to a mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection looked back at her, showing a woman who had aged years in the past few hours. The stress of being discovered, of being forced to trust someone new, had taken its toll. There is one more thing you should know, she said without turning around. The assassination attempt I stopped 3 years ago was not aimed at the current president. It was aimed at his predecessor, President Martinez. Captain Stone's glass stopped halfway to his lips, but President Martinez died of natural causes. Heart failure, I thought. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. That is what everyone was supposed to think. The real plan was much more sophisticated than a simple bombing. They were going to make it look like a heart attack, but they needed someone inside the palace to administer the poison. The terrorist attack was meant to be a distraction, a way to get their assassin close to the president during the chaos. Did they succeed? Captain Stone turned the encrypted drive over in his hands, feeling the weight of its secrets. Outside, night was falling over the village, and he could hear his soldiers settling into their evening routines. The normalcy of these sounds contrasted sharply with the extraordinary revelation he was facing. There is a secure communications terminal in the basement of this building, he said finally. It connects directly to military intelligence headquarters. If your evidence is as damning as you claim, we could transmit it tonight. Elena shook her head. Too risky. If there really is a high-level conspiracy, they will be monitoring all official channels. The moment we attempt to access that data, they will know exactly where we are and what we are doing. Then what do you suggest? Elena walked to the window and peered out at the darkening streets. We need to find someone we can trust completely. Someone who is outside the normal intelligence structure, but who has the authority to act on what we discover. That is a very short list. There is one person, Elena said slowly. General Patricia Vasquez, the defense minister. She has a reputation for integrity, and she has been pushing for reforms in the intelligence services. More importantly, she was Colonel Rodriguez's commanding officer before he transferred to intelligence work. Captain Stone considered this. General Vasquez was indeed known for her uncompromising ethics and her willingness to take on powerful enemies when she believed it was necessary. But she was also a political figure, which meant approaching her would carry its own risks. How do you propose we contact her without alerting the wrong people? Vasquez has a private estate about 50 kilometers from here. She goes there every weekend to ride horses and get away from the politics of the capital. If we could reach her there, we might be able to present our evidence without going through official channels. Captain Stone frowned. Breaking into a general's private property is not exactly a low-risk proposition. Her security detail would shoot first and ask questions later. Not breaking in, Elena corrected. I have met General Vasquez before, during a commendation ceremony after one of my successful missions. She might remember me, and she certainly would remember Colonel Rodriguez's recommendation. If we can get close enough to identify ourselves, that is still assuming we can travel 50 kilometers without being detected. By now, word of what happened in the square will have spread to neighboring villages. If there are enemy agents in the area, they will be looking for any unusual activity. Elena smiled for the first time since the captain had recognized her tattoo. Let me worry about traveling undetected. That is what I do best. Captain Stone studied her face in the lamplight. Despite everything she had been through, despite 3 years of living in hiding, Elena still carried herself with the confidence of a professional operative. He found himself wondering what it had cost her to maintain that facade, what price she had paid for her dedication to duty. There is something else we need to discuss, he said. Even if we succeed in getting this information to General Vasquez, even if she believes us and takes action, you will still be in danger. The people behind this conspiracy will not simply give up and disappear. They will come after you with everything they have. Elena's expression grew serious. I have been in danger for 3 years, Captain. At least now I have a chance to fight back instead of just running and hiding. What about after? Assuming we survive this, what kind of life can you hope to have? Agent Phoenix is officially dead, and Elena Martinez is just a village girl with no real past. Either way, you are trapped between identities that cannot sustain you. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the night sky. I stopped thinking about the future a long time ago. In my line of work, planning beyond the next mission is a luxury most of us cannot afford. But you must have hoped for something more. Before all of this happened, before your final mission went wrong, what did you want your life to be? Elena turned away from the window and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. You ask dangerous questions, Captain. The moment an agent starts thinking about a normal life, about a future beyond the next assignment, that is when they become vulnerable. That is when they start making mistakes. Is that what happened to you? Did you start wanting something more? Elena's laugh was bitter. No, Captain. What happened to me is that I discovered the people I had been risking my life for were not worth the sacrifice. I learned that honor and duty and patriotism are just words that powerful people use to manipulate those who still believe in something greater than themselves. Captain Stone felt a stirring of anger at her words, but he forced himself to remain calm. Not everyone in government service is corrupt. Not everyone is part of whatever conspiracy you uncovered. How can you be so certain? How do you know that you are not being manipulated just as I was? How do you know that this conversation, this moment, is not part of some larger plan that you cannot see? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Captain Stone had to admit that Elena had a point. In the intelligence business, paranoia was not just an occupational hazard. It was a survival skill. Trust was a weakness that could get you killed. I suppose I cannot be certain, he admitted. But I have to believe that there are still people worth fighting for, still causes worth risking everything to defend. Otherwise, what is the point of any of this? Elena studied his face carefully. You remind me of myself 5 years ago. So certain, so idealistic, so convinced that the good guys always win in the end. What changed your mind? Experience, she said simply. Too many missions where the objectives were not what they seemed. Too many times when the people we were supposed to protect turned out to be just as corrupt as the enemies we were fighting. Too many good agents who died for causes that were not worthy of their sacrifice. Captain Stone walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 glasses and handed one to Elena. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps we are all just pawns in someone else's game. But even pawns can sometimes change the outcome of the match if they move at the right moment. Elena accepted the whiskey and took a small sip. The alcohol burned her throat, but it also warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. What are you proposing, Captain? I am proposing that we make our move. Tonight, before anyone else has time to react. We take your evidence to General Vasquez and we let the consequences fall where they may. And if we are wrong about her, if she is part of the conspiracy, or if she simply does not believe us, Captain Stone raised his glass in a mock toast. Then we will probably be dead by morning, but at least we will die knowing that we tried to do the right thing. Elena looked at him for a long moment, then raised her own glass. To Colonel Rodriguez, she said quietly. He deserved better than what he got. To Rodriguez, Captain Stone agreed, and to the chance that his death might still mean something. They drank in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the village had settled into the quiet rhythm of night. Soon it would be time to move, to take the first step toward either justice or destruction. Elena set down her glass and walked to a mirror hanging on the wall. Her reflection looked back at her, showing a woman who had aged years in the past few hours. The stress of being discovered, of being forced to trust someone new, had taken its toll. There is one more thing you should know, she said without turning around. The assassination attempt I stopped 3 years ago was not aimed at the current president. It was aimed at his predecessor, President Martinez. Captain Stone's glass stopped halfway to his lips, but President Martinez died of natural causes. Heart failure, I thought. Elena met his eyes in the mirror. That is what everyone was supposed to think. The real plan was much more sophisticated than a simple bombing. They were going to make it look like a heart attack, but they needed someone inside the palace to administer the poison. The terrorist attack was meant to be a distraction, a way to get their assassin close to the president during the chaos. Did they succeed? Elena turned around, her expression grim. President Martinez died 2 months after the failed terrorist attack. The official cause was heart failure, but I managed to steal a sample of his blood before the autopsy. The same toxin that killed Colonel Rodriguez was in his system. Captain Stone felt the room spinning around him. The implications were staggering. If Elena was telling the truth, then the current president had come to power through murder, and the conspiracy she had uncovered went all the way to the highest levels of government. Who else knows about this? He asked. Just me, Elena replied. And now you. The blood sample and the analysis are included in the encrypted files on that drive. It is the most dangerous information I possess, and the main reason why certain people want me dead. Captain Stone finished his whiskey in one gulp, feeling the burn all the way down. The game they were about to play had stakes higher than he had imagined. They were not just exposing corruption or conspiracy, they were potentially bringing down a government. Are you absolutely certain about this evidence? I had it verified by 3 different independent laboratories, using false identities to prevent anyone from connecting the tests to me. All 3 came back with the same results. Captain Stone stood and walked to a weapons locker in the corner of the room. He pulled out 2 pistols and several clips of ammunition, then handed one of the guns to Elena. If we are going to do this, we need to be prepared for anything. Elena checked the weapon expertly, testing the action and examining the ammunition. How many men can you trust completely? 2, maybe 3. Sergeant Williams has been with me for 5 years, and Corporal Chen saved my life during a border skirmish last year. I would trust them with anything. That will have to be enough. We leave in 1 hour. The journey to General Vasquez's estate began under cover of darkness. Captain Stone had chosen his 2 most trusted men for the mission. Sergeant Williams, a quiet professional with 20 years of military experience, and Corporal Chen, a young communications specialist whose technical skills had proven invaluable in past operations. Elena had changed into civilian clothes, borrowed from the garrison's emergency supplies. Dark jeans, a black sweater, and sturdy boots that would allow her to move silently if necessary. She had also tied her long hair back and applied mud to her face to reduce its visibility in moonlight. Watching her transform from village girl to operative, Captain Stone was reminded of just how dangerous she truly was. They traveled in an unmarked military vehicle, taking back roads and farm tracks to avoid checkpoints in populated areas. Elena sat in the passenger seat, studying a detailed map of the region and planning alternate escape routes should their primary mission fail. Her fingers traced possible paths with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years evading capture. "Tell me about General Vasquez," Elena said as they drove through a forest of pine trees. "What kind of person is she? What motivates her?" Captain Stone considered the question carefully. "She is a soldier. Rose through the ranks on merit, not politics. Lost her husband in the border wars 15 years ago. Never remarried. Her only family is her work and her horses, children, a daughter who died in childhood. Some kind of genetic disease. I think that loss shaped her more than anything else in her life." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Grief can make people either very hard or very compassionate. Which is she?" "Both, depending on the situation. She has no tolerance for corruption or incompetence, but she genuinely cares about the soldiers under her command. She remembers the names of every person who has died in operations she authorized." They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Elena found herself thinking about her own losses, the friends and colleagues who had died because of the conspiracy she was trying to expose. The weight of their memory pressed down on her like a physical burden. "Captain," she said finally, "if something happens to me tonight, promise me you will find a way to get that information to someone who can use it. Do not let Rodriguez and the others die for nothing." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Captain Stone replied firmly. "We are going to succeed. We are going to expose these criminals, and you are going to get your life back." Elena almost smiled at his optimism. "You still believe in happy endings, don't you?" "I believe in justice, and I believe that sometimes good people can make a difference even when the odds are against them." As they approached the general's estate, Elena's demeanor shifted subtly. Her body became more alert, her movements more precise. She was preparing for combat, Captain Stone realized, even though they hoped this would be a peaceful meeting. The estate was situated on a hilltop overlooking a valley filled with vineyards and olive groves. The main house was a sprawling structure built in traditional style, with thick stone walls and red tile roofs. Security lights illuminated the perimeter, but they were positioned to provide visibility rather than to create an impenetrable barrier. There, Elena pointed to a section of the fence line where shadows from nearby trees created a dark corridor. "We can approach from that direction without being seen by the main security cameras." Captain Stone studied the layout through binoculars. "I count at least 6 guards on patrol, plus whatever electronic security systems they have installed. This is not going to be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Elena replied. She opened the vehicle's door and stepped out into the cool night air. "Remember, we want to be detected eventually. We just want to control when and how that happens." They moved through the darkness with practiced stealth, using hand signals to communicate and staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Elena led the way, her movements so fluid and silent that she seemed to disappear and reappear like a ghost. Captain Stone found himself impressed despite his years of military training. The perimeter fence was topped with razor wire, but Elena had come prepared. She produced a small cutting tool from her pack and quickly created an opening large enough for them to pass through. The entire operation took less than 2 minutes. Once inside the grounds, they made their way toward the main house, staying in the shadows of carefully maintained gardens and ornamental trees. Elena held up her hand suddenly and they all froze. In the distance, they could hear voices approaching. 2 security guards were walking their patrol route, flashlights sweeping the ground ahead of them. They were talking quietly about sports scores and weekend plans, clearly not expecting any real threats. Elena waited until they had passed, then led the group in a wide circle around their position. The main house was dark except for a few lights on the second floor. Through an uncurtained window, they could see a figure moving around in what appeared to be a study or office. Captain Stone focused his binoculars on the window and confirmed that it was indeed General Vasquez, working late at a desk covered with papers. "How do we get her attention without triggering a full security response?" Sergeant Williams whispered. Elena studied the building carefully, noting the positions of external lights and security cameras. "There is a phone line running to that window. If we can access it, I might be able to call her directly." "And say what?" "Hello, General. This is a dead spy calling to warn you about a government conspiracy." "Something like that," Elena replied with grim humor. The important thing is to identify myself quickly and mention Colonel Rodriguez. If she remembers him the way the captain described, she will at least listen long enough for us to explain. Corporal Chen had been examining the communications equipment mounted on the outside of the house. I can tap into their phone system, he said quietly. Give me 5 minutes. While Chen worked, Elena and the others maintained watch for patrols. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of horses moving in their paddock and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the kind of peaceful rural setting that seemed worlds away from the deadly games of espionage and conspiracy. Ready, Chen whispered, handing Elena a small device connected to the phone line by nearly invisible wires. Elena took a deep breath and dialed the general's private number, which she had memorized from intelligence files years earlier. The phone in the study rang twice before it was answered. Vasquez, came the crisp, professional voice. General, my name is Agent Phoenix. I worked under Colonel Rodriguez in Special Intelligence. I have urgent information about his death and a threat to national security. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Elena could almost hear the general's mind working, weighing the possibilities and implications of what she had just heard. Agent Phoenix was reported killed in action 3 years ago, General Vasquez said finally. My death was greatly exaggerated. Ma'am, Colonel Rodriguez suspected there was a conspiracy within the intelligence service. He was murdered to prevent him from exposing it. I have evidence that proves who is responsible and how high up the corruption goes. Another pause, shorter this time. Where are you? On your property, General. I apologize for the intrusion, but I could not risk going through official channels. The people responsible for Rodriguez's death have agents throughout the government. Elena could hear movement on the other end of the line, the sound of papers being shuffled and a chair being pushed back. How many people are with you? 3, Captain Marcus Stone and 2 of his men. The captain knew Colonel Rodriguez and can vouch for my identity. Captain Stone, the general's voice carried a note of recognition. Rodriguez mentioned him in several reports, said he had potential for intelligence work. Ma'am, with your permission, we would like to present our evidence to you. What we have discovered could change the entire structure of the government. There was a long silence, and Elena began to worry that the general was calling for security backup. But when Vasquez spoke again, her voice was calm and measured. There is a stable complex behind the main house. Meet me there in 10 minutes. Come alone and keep your hands visible at all times. If this is some kind of trap or deception, you will not leave this property alive. Understood, General. Thank you. Elena ended the call and turned to Captain Stone. She agreed to meet, but she wants me to come alone. Absolutely not, the captain replied immediately. This could be a trap. She could have decided you are too dangerous to be allowed to live. It is a risk we have to take. She knows this property better than we do, and she has trained security personnel at her disposal. If she wanted us dead, we would already be under attack. Captain Stone wanted to argue further, but he knew Elena was right. They had committed themselves to this course of action, and now they had to see it through to its conclusion. If you are not back in 30 minutes, we are coming in after you, he said. Elena nodded and checked her weapon one more time before securing it in its holster. If I am not back in 30 minutes, it probably means you should run as far and as fast as you can. She disappeared into the darkness, moving toward the stable complex with the silent grace that had made her legend in intelligence circles. Captain Stone watched her go, wondering if he would ever see her alive again. In the distance, a horse whinnied softly, as if sensing the approach of danger. The stable complex was larger than Elena had expected, with over a dozen stalls arranged around a central courtyard. The air smelled of hay and leather, familiar scents that reminded her of her childhood on her grandmother's farm before she became an orphan. She moved carefully through the shadows, her senses alert for any sign of danger. General Vasquez was waiting in the center of the courtyard, standing beside a magnificent black horse that nuzzled her shoulder affectionately. She was exactly as Elena remembered her from the commendation ceremony. Tall and athletic, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. Agent Phoenix, the general said as Elena stepped into the light. Or should I call you Elena Martinez? Elena kept her hands visible as instructed, but she was ready to draw her weapon if necessary. Either name will do, General. What matters is the information I carry. General Vasquez studied Elena's face carefully, comparing it to memories from years past. You look older, harder. 3 years of running will do that to a person. 3 years of being hunted by people I once trusted, Elena corrected. 3 years of watching innocent people die while the real criminals stay safe in their government offices. The general's expression remained neutral, but Elena caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of a bitter truth she had long suspected. "Show me what you have," General Vasquez said simply. Elena reached slowly into her jacket and pulled out the encrypted drive. "Everything is here. Financial records showing payments to foreign agents. Communication intercepts proving coordination between terrorists and government officials, and medical evidence that President Martinez was murdered." The general's composure slipped for just a moment at the mention of the president's murder. "That is a very serious accusation." "It is a very serious crime," Elena replied, "and it is only the beginning. The same people who killed President Martinez also killed Colonel Rodriguez, and dozens of other agents who got too close to the truth." General Vasquez took the drive and examined it carefully. "This encryption is military grade. Opening it will require a secure facility and proper authorization codes. I know. That is why I need your help. You are one of the few people in government with both the clearance to access this information and the integrity to act on what you find." The general was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking the horse's neck as she considered her options. Elena could almost see the calculations running through her mind, weighing the risks and benefits of getting involved in what could be the biggest political scandal in the country's history. "Colonel Rodriguez spoke of you often," General Vasquez said finally. "He said you were the best agent he had ever trained, but also the most idealistic. He worried that your faith in the system would get you killed. He was right to worry. My faith in the system did almost get me killed, but it also led me to discover the truth." "And what truth is that?" Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "That our government has been infiltrated at the highest levels by foreign agents and domestic traitors. That elections have been manipulated, officials have been murdered, and policies have been shaped by people whose loyalty lies with enemy nations." General Vasquez's eyes hardened. "Do you have proof of these claims? Names, dates, bank account numbers, recorded conversations. Everything you would need to clean house and restore legitimate government." The sound of footsteps approaching made both women tense. Elena's hand moved instinctively toward her weapon, but General Vasquez held up a calming gesture. A moment later, a young aide appeared in the courtyard entrance. "General," the aide said formally, "you have an urgent call from the capital, the defense minister's office." Elena felt her heart sink. If word of their meeting had already reached the capital, it meant their security had been compromised. The conspiracy's agents would be mobilizing even now to prevent the truth from coming out. "Tell them I will call back in the morning," General Vasquez said calmly. "I am not to be disturbed for the rest of the night." The aide hesitated. "Ma'am, they said it was regarding Agent Phoenix. They said she might try to contact you tonight." Elena and the general exchanged glances. The trap was closing faster than either of them had anticipated. "What exactly did they tell you?" General Vasquez asked her aide. "That Agent Phoenix is a rogue operative who has been selling state secrets to foreign powers. They said she might try to approach you with false information designed to destabilize the government." Elena almost laughed at the irony. The same people who had been selling secrets to foreign powers were now accusing her of their crimes. It was a classic intelligence operation. Accuse your enemy of your own wrongdoing to muddy the waters and confuse the issue. General Vasquez looked at Elena with new understanding. "How long do we have before they send people to find you?" "Not long. They probably have teams mobilizing right now, maybe an hour before they reach your estate." The general made her decision quickly. "Rodriguez trusted you, and Rodriguez was never wrong about people. We are going to open that drive tonight, and we are going to act on whatever we find." She turned to her aide. "Lieutenant Cooper, I need you to prepare the secure communications room in the basement. Full encryption protocols and no outside contact until I give the all clear." The aide looked confused but nodded. "Yes, ma'am. What should I tell the defense minister's office if they call back?" "Tell them I am conducting a security exercise and cannot be reached until morning." "And Lieutenant, not a word of this to anyone else on the staff." "That is a direct order." As the aide hurried away, General Vasquez turned back to Elena. "Your Captain Stone and his men, where are they?" "Waiting about 200 meters from here. They will come running if they hear gunfire. Signal them to join us. We are going to need all the help we can get." Elena pulled out a small flashlight and sent a coded signal toward the woods where Captain Stone was hiding. Within minutes, he and his men appeared at the edge of the courtyard, moving with military precision. "Captain," General Vasquez said as they approached, "I hope you realize what you are getting involved in here." "I believe I do, ma'am," Captain Stone replied. "Colonel Rodriguez was my mentor. If there is a chance to get justice for his murder, I am willing to take any risk." General Vasquez nodded approvingly. "Good. We are going to need that attitude for what comes next." She led them into the main house through a side entrance, moving quickly through hallways lined with military memorabilia and family photographs. The basement had been converted into a sophisticated command center, with multiple computer terminals and communication equipment that rivaled anything Elena had seen in government facilities. "I had this installed after my husband was killed," General Vasquez explained as she began activating the systems. "I wanted to be able to monitor military operations from home without having to rely on potentially compromised government networks." The encryption on Elena's drive proved to be even more sophisticated than expected. It took nearly 20 minutes for the general's computers to break through the multiple security layers and access the files. When the first documents appeared on screen, the room fell silent. The financial records alone were staggering. Millions of dollars in payments to government officials, detailed breakdowns of bribes and kickbacks, offshore bank accounts used to hide the money trail, but it was the communication intercepts that truly revealed the scope of the conspiracy. "My God," General Vasquez whispered as she scrolled through transcripts of recorded phone calls. "This goes all the way to the Vice President's office." Elena leaned over her shoulder to point out specific entries. "Look at this conversation from 6 months ago. The Vice President is discussing which military contracts should be awarded to which companies, and he is taking direction from someone he calls the Controller." "Who is the Controller?" "That is the one piece I was never able to identify. Someone high enough to give orders to cabinet-level officials, but smart enough to never use their real name in communications." Captain Stone was examining another set of files that showed detailed intelligence on military operations that had supposedly been classified at the highest levels. How did foreign agents get access to this information? Some of these documents should have been seen by fewer than a dozen people. "Because some of those dozen people are working for the other side," Elena replied grimly. "The Controller has been building a network of compromised officials for years, maybe decades. By now they have people in every major government department." General Vasquez stood up and began pacing the room, her military mind already planning the next steps. "We need to move quickly. Once they realize we have this information, they will try to discredit it or claim it was fabricated. We need to get copies to trusted allies before they can mount a counterattack." "Who can we trust?" Captain Stone asked. "If this conspiracy is as widespread as it appears, how do we know who is clean and who is compromised?" "We start with people who were close to Rodriguez," General Vasquez said. "People he trusted. People who have been asking the same questions we are asking now." Elena was studying a file that contained photographs and biographical information on suspected conspiracy members. "General, look at this. Your aide, Lieutenant Cooper, his file is in here." General Vasquez felt her blood turn cold as she read the entry. Cooper had been receiving payments for over 2 years, providing information about her schedule, her communications, and her security arrangements. He was the reason the defense minister's office had known to call tonight. "We need to leave immediately," she said, moving toward a weapons cabinet in the corner of the room. "Cooper will have reported our activities by now. We probably have minutes before this place is surrounded." As if summoned by her words, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo in the distance, growing louder by the second. Through the basement windows, they could see searchlights beginning to sweep the grounds. "Too late," Elena said, checking her weapon. "They are already here." The basement command center erupted into controlled chaos as the team prepared for what they knew would be their final stand. General Vasquez moved with military efficiency, distributing weapons and ammunition while simultaneously uploading the most critical files from Elena's drive to multiple secure servers around the world. "How many copies can you make?" Elena asked, watching the progress bars crawl across the computer screens. "I'm sending everything to 12 different locations," the general replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Military intelligence stations in allied countries, secure servers maintained by trusted journalists, And backup systems controlled by officers I know are clean. The helicopter rotors were directly overhead now, and they could hear vehicles approaching on the estate's main road. Through the narrow basement windows, Elena caught glimpses of tactical teams in black uniforms taking positions around the house. Captain Stone had found an emergency exit at the back of the basement, but a quick reconnaissance revealed that it too was being watched. "They have us completely surrounded," he reported. "At least 30 men, maybe more. Professional military or intelligence operatives, not local police. They want this contained quickly and quietly," Elena observed. "Official story will probably be that we were foreign agents who attacked a general's private residence. No survivors to contradict their version of events." General Vasquez finished the uploads and turned to face the group. "The truth is now in the hands of people who can act on it. Whatever happens to us, the conspiracy will be exposed." Sergeant Williams, who had been monitoring radio frequencies, looked up from his equipment with a grim expression. "They're jamming all communications. No one will be able to call for help, and no word of what happens here will get out for hours." Elena walked to the weapons cabinet and selected a rifle with a high-powered scope. "General, is there a way to access the roof from inside the house?" "Service stairs in the back hallway, but why would you want to go up? That just makes you more exposed." Elena checked the rifle's action and loaded a fresh magazine. "Because sometimes the best defense is a good offense. If I can get to an elevated position, I might be able to create enough confusion for the rest of you to escape." Captain Stone grabbed her arm as she headed for the stairs. "That is a suicide mission. There are too many of them, and you will be trapped up there with no way out." Elena looked into his eyes and saw genuine concern there, not just for the mission, but for her personally. In another life, under different circumstances, she might have allowed herself to care about someone like him. But Agent Phoenix had learned long ago that personal attachments were a luxury she could not afford. "This is what I do, Captain. This is what I was trained for. Sometimes one person has to make the hard choice so that others can live to fight another day." General Vasquez stepped between them. "There might be another way. The stable complex has an underground tunnel that connects to the main house. It was built during the border wars as an escape route. If we can reach it, we might be able to get out without being detected." "Where does the tunnel exit?" Corporal Chen asked. "About half a kilometer away in a maintenance shed near the property's eastern boundary. From there it is open country for several kilometers." Elena considered this option, but she could see the flaw in the plan immediately. "They will have thermal imaging equipment. Even if we reach the tunnel, they will detect our movement underground and be waiting for us at the exit." The sound of glass breaking upstairs indicated that the tactical teams were beginning their assault on the main house. They would work their way through each room systematically, checking for threats and gathering intelligence. It would not be long before they found the basement entrance. "We need a distraction," Captain Stone said. "Something big enough to draw their attention away from the tunnel exit." Elena smiled grimly. "I think I can provide that." She moved to General Vasquez's communications equipment and began adjusting settings on what appeared to be a powerful radio transmitter. "If I broadcast the most sensitive files on an open frequency, every intelligence agency in the region will pick up the signal. The conspiracy's people will have to choose between stopping the broadcast and maintaining their perimeter. That will definitely get their attention," the general agreed. "But it will also paint a target on this exact location. They will concentrate everything they have on stopping that transmission." "Exactly. While they are focused on that, you take the tunnel and get out. Once you are clear, I will stop the broadcast and try to follow." Captain Stone was studying the building's blueprints, looking for any alternative that would not require Elena to sacrifice herself. "What if we split up? Half of us take the tunnel, half create the distraction. That way we have 2 chances for someone to escape." Elena shook her head. "Too risky. If they capture any of us alive, torture will eventually break down our resistance. We cannot afford to give them any information about where the files went or who else might have access to them." The sound of footsteps in the hallway above grew louder. The tactical teams were getting close to finding the basement entrance. It was time to make their final decision. General Vasquez grabbed a secure laptop that contained copies of the most critical files. "Elena, you start the broadcast. Captain Stone, take your men and prepare the tunnel route. I will stay here to make sure the transmission continues as long as possible." "General, with respect, that is not your call to make," Elena said firmly. "You are too valuable to lose." The country is going to need leaders like you to clean up the mess we are exposing. And the country is going to need agents like you to make sure this never happens again. Elena was touched by the sentiment, but she knew the reality of their situation. I have been dead for 3 years already, General. Tonight just makes it official. Before anyone could argue further, Elena activated the transmitter and began broadcasting the encrypted files on multiple frequencies simultaneously. The signal was powerful enough to reach intelligence stations across the continent, and she knew that within minutes, analysts around the world would be scrambling to decode the information. The reaction was immediate. The tactical teams upstairs began moving with greater urgency, and the helicopter overhead shifted position to focus on the main house. Radio chatter increased dramatically as the assault commander received new orders from his superiors. "It is working," General Vasquez said, monitoring the enemy communications. "They are pulling people away from the perimeter to concentrate on stopping the broadcast." Captain Stone led Sergeant Williams and Corporal Chen toward the tunnel entrance, but he paused at the doorway and looked back at Elena one more time. "When this is over, when the truth comes out and justice is served, I want people to know who really made it possible. I want them to know about Agent Phoenix." Elena did not look away from her transmitter controls, but he could see her smile reflected in the computer screen. "Just make sure they know about Colonel Rodriguez too. He deserved better than he got." The tunnel was exactly as General Vasquez had described, a narrow concrete passage that ran underground for several hundred meters, before emerging in a camouflage shed near the property boundary. Captain Stone and his men moved through it quickly, pausing only to listen for sounds of pursuit. Behind them, Elena continued her broadcast while General Vasquez monitored enemy movements. The tactical teams had found the basement entrance and were preparing to breach it with explosives. They had perhaps minutes before the command center would be overrun. "General," Elena said without taking her eyes off the equipment, "there is something else on that drive that I did not mention before." "A list of foreign assets who have been working inside our government for over a decade. When this information gets out, it will trigger the biggest intelligence scandal in history." General Vasquez looked at the files scrolling across the screen and felt a mixture of anger and determination. So many good people had died to protect secrets that should never have existed in the first place. So many lives had been lost to preserve a system that was rotten at its core. "How long until the broadcast is complete?" she asked. "Another 3 minutes for the essential files. 5 minutes for everything." The explosion that breached the basement door was deafeningly loud in the confined space. Elena could hear tactical teams flooding into the upper level of the basement, moving with professional precision toward the command center. She estimated they had perhaps 90 seconds before the door to their room was breached. "General, you need to go now. Take the tunnel and catch up with Captain Stone." General Vasquez hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the secure laptop and headed for the tunnel entrance. "Elena, if you can find a way out of this, there will always be a place for you in the new intelligence service we are going to build." Elena finally looked away from the transmitter, meeting the general's eyes with the expression of peace that surprised them both. "Thank you, ma'am, for everything." General Vasquez disappeared into the tunnel just as the command center door exploded inward. Elena continued working at the transmitter as smoke filled the room and tactical teams poured through the breach. She could hear orders being shouted, the sound of equipment being overturned as they searched for the source of the transmission. When they finally found her, Elena was sitting calmly at the communications console, her hands visible on the keyboard. The broadcast was complete. The truth was spreading across the world's intelligence networks, and her mission was finally finished. The tactical team leader approached her cautiously, his weapon trained on her center mass. "Agent Phoenix, you are under arrest for treason, espionage, and murder." Elena smiled and slowly raised her hands above her head. "Actually, Agent Phoenix died 3 years ago. I am just Elena Martinez, a village girl who made some very powerful people very angry." 3 days later, the first news reports began to surface. Government officials around the world were resigning in disgrace as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. The current president, faced with undeniable evidence of his involvement in his predecessor's murder, chose to flee the country rather than face trial. General Vasquez was appointed as interim head of government, tasked with cleaning up the intelligence services and restoring public trust. Captain Stone was promoted to colonel, and given command of a new internal security division dedicated to preventing future conspiracies. And in a small prison cell in the capital, Elena Martinez sat reading newspaper accounts of the scandal she had helped expose. The official story was that she had been killed during the raid on General Vasquez's estate, her body destroyed in a fire that had consumed the main house. Only a handful of people knew the truth, that Agent Phoenix had survived one final mission, and that Elena Martinez was finally free to decide what kind of life she wanted to live. The woman who had been both legend and ghost looked out through her cell window at the morning sun, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to hope for a future beyond the next assignment. The tattoo along her spine would always mark her as someone special, someone dangerous, someone who had paid a terrible price for doing the right thing. But perhaps in the new world they were building that would be enough.